Hi, I'm Moulis and welcome to another video in my series about bullying, harassment and victimisation in the Australian Public Service in the Department of Finance in Canberra. Now, I'm up to 1981 now. Now, 1981 was a year of change in the Department of Finance because that was the year they brought in the security guards. I mean, up until then, it had been open access. You could walk in and out whenever you wanted, and it was a fair, the atmosphere was better than it had become. I mean, the introduction of the security guards came as a result of the great budget leak of 1980, where the whole 1980 budget was leaked to Laurie Oakes from the Herald Sun in Melbourne. He published the whole... No, I think Laurie Oakes was working for the Daily Mirror at that stage, and they put the budget on the front page. Well, anyway, this caused great ructions within Treasury and Finance, and so they brought in the security guards. Now, somebody had said there that the security guards were only meant to be there for the budget period. They were an intimidation tactic by the bosses more than anything else, to try and discourage anybody from leaking anything to the press, to the media. And most people sort of had the assumption that after the budget the security guards would be gone, it would be back to normal again, and we could get back to the easygoing open access that we had at the Treasury building. But it didn't happen. The security guards stayed on, and the security kept on getting upgraded all the time. I mean, I was working there in the reproduction room where I had been transferred in 1982, and there was constant jackhammering and everything going on there at the entrance to Treasury, which was just a little bit down the corridor from us, constantly upgrading this security. And I thought it was the biggest waste of money I'd ever seen up until that point. I mean, it was stupid, and it was just, I just considered it to be pointless, because you could still pick up a phone to Laurie Oakes, you could still put the budget on the fax machine and send the budget to Laurie Oakes. I mean, I used to have a rucksack at the time, and I used to bring that in and out of the place all the time. If that wasn't searched, I mean, I could have had a copy of the budget in there and given it to Laurie Oakes. It just seemed to be the most pointless thing that I'd ever seen. And the worst thing about it was that it completely changed the atmosphere there in the Department of Finance. That people started acting differently, and it really did have an effect on everybody. And I thought it was a bit of a novelty to start with, that you had your security guard pass with your picture on it, and you flashed it to the security guard when you came in and when you came out. It was a bit of a novelty to start with, but then it started getting oppressive. I mean, as things got worse and worse at the Department of Finance, as probably my mental illness got worse and worse, exacerbated by my treatment at the Department of Finance and my time at the Department of Finance, and things were going downhill, it became extremely claustrophobic. I mean, I started looking at the security guards there, the MSS security guards in their imitation police uniforms there, with their navy blue long pants and their blue shirts with the MSS emblem, trying to make them look like police officers. I mean, I started seeing them as Nazi prison guards, on the weekend, and work had become weekday detention. I mean, on the weekend I was there, I was at home, and then Monday morning I had to get on the bus, come in, flash my, go through the security checks, and then be locked up for the rest of the week, hating every minute of it. It was just like prison. It had become oppressive, the atmosphere in there, and a lot of people could cope with it, you know, because they were public servants and they were used to this way, and if you know, the government told them, the bosses in the department told them that this is the way things were, they adapted it. A few of them did. But a lot of people in the department were very uncomfortable with this and didn't like the idea of it at all. It was like Big Brother 1984. I mean, back then, I mean, nowadays we've got surveillance cameras, CCTV, and security guards everywhere, and nobody thinks anything about it. But back then, in 1981, we had been a very open society in Australia. We had never had anything like this in Australia before, CCTV and all this sort of thing. And it became a real shock to us that this is how things were going to be from now on. And that's what happened in society in Australia, that we got more and more security, more and more of this sort of thing was being laid onto us. And anyway, it made the work atmosphere uncomfortable there, even more uncomfortable than it was. I started hating it even more, you know. And as far as actual work was concerned, the summer of 1981 and Christmas 1981 was terrible. It was just a disaster. I had been transferred from office services, you know, where Macaronis and the rest of them were, you know, I didn't get along with them and they didn't like me, and I'd been to counselling sessions, and I had that Section 55 of the Public Service Act used against me, and all this sort of thing was going on. And Macaronis, as head of office services there, he'd given up on me, and he arranged to have me transferred to estimates and accounts. Now, the philosophy as the director there and the assistant secretary of management services kept telling me that the strategy was to move me into different jobs and to find a job that I was good at, you know, and if there were no complaints, I thought that if there were no complaints, if I was good at it, that I'd stay there and things would be fine. Now, I went to estimates and accounts in December 1981, and it was just awful. There was this female there named Virginia Price. I mean, the seating pattern was very similar to reconciliation in the accounting office in 1978. Across from me was this female. Her name was Virginia Price, and the boss there was Ian Briggs. He was sort of sat next to her, and both of them were sort of looking at me all the time. And as soon as I stopped work, Virginia Price would say, "Oh, Ian, John stopped work. Ian, John stopped work." And God, I came to hate this female, this little tattletaling bitch who was there all the time. And, oh, look, I mean, and I really went into a very deep depression during that period. It was one of my worst manic depressive episodes during that whole period. I mean, I was just in a total malaise. I could barely function. It was awful. I mean, I can remember in December 1981, I went to Sydney for the weekend, and I was in Discontinued Records in Hurstville, where you used to be able to buy the reissued records and everything. And I remember, you know, I felt like screaming. You know, the thought ran through my head to just start screaming out loud, you know, because of the situation I was in there at finance and all of that. And I came very close to the edge during that period. And 1981, it was, you know, I remember Christmas that year was a misery, and New Year that year. And anyway, I came back and I worked in estimates and accounts for a couple more weeks. And then I thought, well, things have really gotten bad here. But by January, that depressive period had passed. I mean, it was a problem, I had no control over it, that these depressive phases would come. And I'd tell my parents about it, I'd tell my sister about it, and they didn't understand anything about it. I mean, like I said, mental illness back then was this taboo area that you didn't talk about, that people with mental illness were locked away in lunatic asylums still back then, and you still had things like Kenmore Hospital in Goulburn and all this sort of things. People still made jokes about, oh, he should be in the loony bin, that sort of thing. And it was very much an area that nobody really had taken time to look into. And 1981 was International Year of Disabled Persons. And all of the imagery we saw on the television, the ads and everything, were these glamorous images of people in wheelchairs and men in wheelchairs and girls there hugging them and loving them, everything. But there was nothing mentioned about mental illness. There were no education campaigns about mental illness, no attempt to break down the barriers. I mean, that was the slogan that was used. No attempt to break down the barriers regarding mental illness or anything. And it was terrible. In fact, during that year, the Reverend Fred Nile had been given a column in the Sunday Telegraph, a weekly column in the Sunday Telegraph, and he was there preaching intolerance all the time, and that sort of had another effect on people. I mean, it was a very confused period. It was a period where President Reagan had taken office in the United States. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of Britain, and Russia still had the old leadership in charge, Brezhnev and all of that, and the whole sort of society at that stage was sort of, and it was the start of the 1980s as well, and at the start of each decade, people sort of feel that, this is a brave new era, that a new era has started, that sort of thing. Anyway, the depressive illness went, and I got put into parliamentary liaison. And it was a total change. It was a really nice area. The people in parliamentary liaison were nice to me. I mean, there were no complaints against me, and I was able to do my work, and it was really good. And I used to do the courier run to the minister's office, the Minister for Finance, Dame Margaret Guilfoyle, at the time, who was a minister in Malcolm Fraser's government, Liberal government. And my political leanings have always been conservative, and I was a Liberal voter at the time, and I'm a bit of a swinging voter myself. I have been known to vote Labor, but generally I'm conservative. And I was going over to the minister's office, and I was on good terms with everyone. It was Old Parliament House. It was just across the Rose Garden. There was no Aboriginal tent embassy at that stage, so I just walked from the Treasury building across to Old Parliament House. There was an entrance there at the side of Old Parliament House. You walked up the stairs into the new area of Old Parliament House, into the minister's office. The minister's staff were really easygoing and everything, and because they knew, and everybody at the department knew that I was a Liberal voter. And things were going really well, and they went well for a few months there. And then what happened is that the Reverend Fred Nile was all over the media by that stage. He was on 60 Minutes, everything like, and I got sick and tired of it. I mean, the Sunday Telegraph was there promoting him all the time. I mean, they managed to have him win a seat in the New South Wales Parliament at the end of 1981, and so this was in the ascendancy, and I just got sick and tired of it. I mean, I wrote a letter to the Sunday Telegraph criticising Fred Nile. They didn't print it, but someone from the rival Sun Herald had found out about that letter and had written something on the back page criticising Fred Nile, and I wrote in to the Sun Herald agreeing with that criticism of Fred Nile and, you know, calling for gay law reform in New South Wales and all of that. I mean, they tried to bring in gay law reform in New South Wales at the end of 1981, but Fred Nile wrote these columns in the Sunday Telegraph. They were virtual editorials in the Sunday Telegraph because Rupert Murdoch, the owner of the Sunday Telegraph, was not in favour of gay rights or gay law reform, and Ita Buttrose, who was the editor-in-chief of the Sunday Telegraph, she was forced to run this column by Fred Nile in the paper, and it caused a storm of controversy, but they kept it there week after week. And then I came back to work on the following Monday, and the atmosphere had totally changed there. I went to the minister's office, and they'd gone cold on me. I mean, I started getting these funny looks and everything, and I realised, and I thought, you know, I mean, surely it couldn't have been because of the letter to the editor in the Sun Herald, you know. And so I went about 4 more days, and I was called into the director's office there at Finance, and I was told that I'd be moving back to office services, that I would be moved out of parliamentary liaison into office services. And I couldn't understand why. I kept on saying, why? I said, I don't want to go. And the director said, well, we've decided you're going and you're going. That's all there is about it. And I put 2 and 2 together. I realised that the reason I was going was because of the letter in the Sun Herald. And years later, when Freedom of Information came in and you could look at your file, I looked at my file. Well, I asked about if there was any papers generated by it, and they sent back a letter to me saying no papers were generated at all. I mean, this was 1985, and then 1988, after I had been kicked out of Department of Finance, I went back under Freedom of Information and looked at my files, and I found the papers in the file. They just said that Moulis must be moved to office services. So Moulis must be moved, whether it was the minister's office or someone in the government decreed that I had to move. And I saw in one of the pages that said, it is true that Moulis was given an easy ride while he was in parliamentary liaison. So me doing well, no complaints against me, no staring at me all the time, that's me being given an easy run. And that's a bad situation, according to the bosses there, that I was doing well. And this was the situation that I was told they wanted. You know, they said that they were moving me around to try and find a job that I was good at, a job where there were no complaints. And I was good at that job. There were no complaints. But, you know, they decided to move me into office services. And I didn't like office services because there was always the threat that I'd be put back into the print room, into the reproduction room again. And I didn't want that. And I had told them that I didn't want that. So I was there in office services there. And, you know, I tried to make a good go of it because it was a different position. It was the head of stores in the department that office services ran, where I distributed stores and everything like that. And, you know, I tried to make as good a go of it as I possibly could. And for a while I did make a good go of it. I was good in that job. But of course the bosses in finance intervened again and ruined it. Anyway, that's about it for this video. Stay tuned for the next exciting